The feast is o'er. Now brimming wine in lordly cup is seen to shine before each eager guest. And silence fills the crowded hall, as deep as when the herald's call thrills in the loyal breast.
Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, an Anglo-Norman baron.
I don't really understand what accent I should do in response to that, and that's sort of the point of the episode.
Maybe like a, ho ho ho, would you like some roast beef, geezer?
Oh, give me some eel pies.
Yeah, exactly. It's a new year, and we're so happy to be coming to you this January with the final episode of our series on the Norman Conquest.
That's right. We're going to be wrapping up lots of plot threads. We're going to be opening up plot threads and then closing them again quite abruptly. But we're going to be talking mostly about how the Norman regime that emerged in 1066 after William's victory at Hastings and crowning as King of England and then subsequent crushing of all dissent, how that regime consolidated itself and even managed to expand outside of the boundaries of England through various mechanisms, and was able to influence or gradually, partially take over various kingdoms of what is now Scotland, Wales, and Ireland.
And just as the cold winds of winter have blown us into another year, so shall the winds of history blow us through this new regime into a new era of English and indeed European politics.
On gentle Normans, kings of Roland.
I think let's set the table a little bit to start, because after 1066 and then the harrying of the North in 1070, England is really in a sort of unprecedented place. The elite has essentially been cleared out because in the battles of Stamford Bridge and then in Hastings, huge numbers of the Anglo-Saxon elite have been killed. Other members have sort of refused to reconcile themselves with William's rule and have sort of made themselves outlaws, either sort of living in bushes in some cases, or just straight up leaving the country. And so what you see now is the stocking of the highest ranks of the nobility, and to be honest, most of the ranks of the nobility, but also of all forms of royal government, with these new Norman officials and nobles. And when I say Norman, I should emphasize, by the way, that these aren't just Normans who come over. So William brings with him large numbers of Flemings and Bretons and people from other nobles from other parts of France to, take over these estates and to serve as his officers to enforce his rule. It's not a mass migration in the way that you might have seen in the 5th century in post-Roman Britain, or even probably the numbers of Vikings who came over when the Vikings took over half of England that one time. It's a small number of people, in the thousands, but they are placed at pretty much every single important point in the country, and are given all the important jobs.
The Gallicization of the upper echelons of English society did open the door for more people who were connected with that society on the continent to come over and make their lives and their fortunes there. So we have to look at the Norman Conquest, obviously not as just an event that was over, but as the beginning of really a 1,000-year process of these different strains of Englishness and Frenchness and the different cultures and prestiges fighting with each other over who was going to be dominant.
And also, I would say many of the this kind of replaces a lot of the old cleavages of English politics. So, Norseman versus Anglo-Saxon, people who were from the old pre-Canute.
So we're going to be talking through each of the nations within the British Isles, and I think the best place to start is really right at home, both, the home of this story really in the home of us right
of this
now.
Podcast.
Of
yeah.
this podcast. This podcast is English. And it's also like, what, 2 years old? It's going to go to nursery next year. And one of the reasons why it feels, why it's possible to talk about the massive shifts within English society, especially within like the demographics of the ruling class and the composition of the nobility, is because we have extremely good records. For the first time in this podcast series, we can say we have great records. And because that's because this is one of the effects of the Norman Conquest. So we've talked about the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle before, it needs no introduction, and it states in 1085 that the King William sent his agents to survey every shire in England, to list his holdings and to list the dues that are owed to him. And so they do it. They survey essentially an area of land that's roughly equivalent to all of modern England, which is no small task. Basically trying to make a list of everything that's there, every estate, every acre of like arable land, all of the mills and the orchards and the forests. And you have to look at this within context of this struggle that we've introduced already in the previous episode that William is engaged in, basically as soon as he takes power in England, to squash and suppress any kind of aspirations of rebellion from the English and to stave off any possible attacks from elsewhere. Right, so in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, they talk about Knut. This is a different Knut, son of King Sweyn, but Knut, King of Denmark.
Unrelated to the other Knut, son of King Sweyn.
No, really. I mean, they may well be related.
They are related. They are.
Yes. Anyways.
Svein Estridsson is the Svein who sort of temporarily assisted and then sort of bailed on the English rebels in 1069. He is the grandson of Svein Forkbeard.
There you go. So when King William hears about more Danes sailing to England to try to rough him up, he is in Normandy at the time, and he basically rushes home to England to try to deal with this whole thing. And he actually finds out that they get waylaid, the Vikings. They never actually do show up in the end, so it's kind of a false alarm. But he's already amassed this enormous army as King William, and they're all up there, like, in the north of England. And I think he realizes kind of how desolate it is, and he's basically, like, turning his men loose to basically find food on their own. And it's a bit of an administrative disaster. And he also does a little bit more harrying while he's up there. He apparently lays waste all of the land around the seacoast for good measure, just so that if the Vikings do ever land, they don't have anything to go off of while they're there. But he's clearly, like, a bit sort of, rattled or perplexed or a bit of both by this problem. And so he convenes with all of the men of his council over the new year, and he decides they need to make a plan for how they're going to deal with this kind of thing. And the conclusion that they come to is that they need to essentially make a list of every single asset in England, because William is the king, and as the king now, he is entitled to all of England, and everyone has an obligation to provide him with a certain proportion of their funds, a certain proportion of their men, perhaps, or of their property, in the name of loyalty to the king. So he needs to know exactly what he can extract from the people that he rules over. And so they do it, basically. And it's a kind of insane thing to do, because nothing has really been done like it since like the Roman Empire, when they did do a big sort of semi-annual census. And nothing is attempted like this basically for 800 years afterwards in England. So the singularity of this event is quite, cannot really be understated. It's a huge endeavor, because what they do is they set out to make a list of, for each sort of parcel of land, who owns that land, what its value is, the annual taxes that land and its owners owe, and what is on that land. And they make a list of this not only for 1086, which is when this is being carried out, but also for 1066, before the conquest, as best they can. And so we have this fascinating resource that we end up with that gives us an overview of the land structure and the land holdings and the sort of economic structure of England at the evening of the Norman Conquest and then 20 years later. And the picture that it paints is extremely striking. And eventually all of this information is compiled in a book that comes to be known as the Doomsday Book. And we get a great quote from someone. This is Richard Fitzneill, who's the treasurer of England around 100 years later. And you can tell that, like, you know, Anglicization hasn't fully taken place. He calls the English the natives, but he says the natives call this book Doomsday, that is, the Day of Judgment. This is a metaphor, for just as no judgment of that final, severe, and terrible trial can be evaded by any subterfuge, so when any controversy arises in the kingdom concerning the matters contained in the book, and recourse is made to the book, its word cannot be denied or set aside without penalty. For this reason, we call this book the Book of Judgments, not because it contains decisions made in controversial cases, but because from it, as from the Last Judgment, there is no further appeal. And so you can't confuse this in the slightest with modern censuses, you know, because this is meant to be the final sort of stone in the, you know, this is the keystone in the William's Norman project to be the complete sovereign of England.
And I would also say it's really interesting and relevant that this happens in response to Viking raiding, because I think it fundamentally marks a change in the way that the English state sort of understands itself and the way that the English state operates. Because obviously England has been the most bureaucratic, the most centralized state in Northern Europe for over 100 years at this point. That's one of the reasons why it's so lucrative as a target to take over, because there is a lot of stuff to tax. But now you're seeing an English king who is going around trying to solve the problem. The problem of Vikings has not been solved by Danegeld, which is something that William understands because he already tried that a decade ago. But now we're seeing a new strategy, which is let's become the most viciously efficient system of extracting wealth in the world to allow us to respond to this.
Yes, because despite being a very well-developed government, the Anglo-Saxon state was not exactly, you know, it was not a state that prioritized the letter of the law. And as we've discussed, it was a state that very heavily lent on things like consensus and relationships and, you know, was not by any means anywhere near as centralized power-wise as what William was going for. And we see that in all of these different before and after snapshots of basically every little village and town and hamlet in England. Now, you might be wondering, oh, can I go look at this book? You might be thinking, oh, it sucks that I can't because it's in the National Archives in Kew and it's kept under lock and key. It's also 2 enormous books, actually, and I can't read Latin. Well, in 2011, one crazy woman named Anna Powell Smith actually basically digitized the whole Doomsday Book and turned it into an interactive map that you can go on.
What?
Did you not know this?
No.
Dude! Go search Open Doomsday.
I'm doing it now. Keep talking.
So you can browse a map of all of the different estates in England and click on any one. You can browse and search. I know, it's insane. You can browse and search a list of places. You can browse and search a list of people. And you can sort by things like, you know, and filter by things like what types of land there were, numbers of holdings that different people had. You can filter out for land that was wasted. So land that was barren or not economically productive. It's really, really fun just to click around. So spend an afternoon doing that. And so some things that you can notice just by browsing around. Well, first of all, I think the big one is the amount of land that's just concentrated at the top of society. Because you can sort through the list of people. You can sort for the amount, people who owned the biggest amount of land before the conquest and then after. And if you look before, you have... It's almost kind of, like, sad and quite melancholy to, like, sort through at the list and see, like, King Edward at the top and then, like, Earl Harold at the bottom, below him. And it's like, oh, I remember those guys. And this is just like, clerical records of all how they've been dispossessed. If we search by, like, number of estates owned before the conquest, then we get at the very top King Edward and King Harold's, Earl Harold below him. The third most commonly listed owner is Freeman, 1, which I think goes to show that a lot of the Norman owners did not know who had owned their land before the conquest, which is also quite sad. Then we get, like, a lot of generic names, and Archbishop Stigand, who was obviously...
we met him previously.
Quite a problematic character. We have a lot. You have to be careful when you search on this website because... it will, like, pool together common names. So, like, anyone that's just listed as, like, Alwyn will be down as just Alwyn, and then they'll all get merged into one mega Alwyn, which is why the fourth most sort of powerful landholder is just Alwyn, no surname, even though that was not a person. But yeah, you get Tostig and Morcar on there, and Queen Edith. And then if you look after the conquest, you see that the amount of land holdings that are owned by the top 5 people, 10 people, it's a lot more land. So you get King William at the top, and then you have, like, a long list of nobles, specifically, who have been given large land holdings. And the idea of, like, land as power being vested in a sort of select cadre of people who have been chosen by the king is extremely evident there, and it's backed up by all of the data kind of quantitatively. So we know that after the conquest, William controlled directly about 20% of the land in England. So that's already pretty insane. Norman nobility control about 50% of the land in England as well, and that doesn't mean that they owned it because they were still paying taxes to William, and it was still essentially royal land. They were more or less just like the overseers / beneficiaries of that land. And around 200 Normans controlled in England what had previously been the property of around 2,000 Englishmen and women, because women own land as well. So there's been a decrease by a factor of 10 in how many different landowners, major landowners there are. The church controls about 25% of the land, and then about 5% is being controlled by English people after the conquest. So not every single English person was stripped of every single possession, but most of them were. And all of the big landowners. Yes. In part because they all fucking died. Yeah. I think the only one who we don't have, like, confirmed, of our characters from the first 5 episodes, the only 2 who we don't have, like, a really clear confirmed death date for are Edwin and Morcar, and they just either got imprisoned or, like, went to live in the fen. And another thing you can do on the website is you can filter by land that was wasted. Wasted. Well, what does wasted mean? Because it's hugely contentious. Yeah, I think there's a general agreement that it means land that was not economically productive. And I think the specific definition of wasteland matters less than the difference between the amount of wasteland before the conquest and after. Because, of course, there was probably some unproductive, maybe not very arable land before the conquest. But when you click on wasted land or wasteland on this map, then basically, have you done this? I'm looking at it right now. Which parts of the map light up bright red? Well, I was about to say, you can see the borders of Yorkshire. Yes. Like, it's really unsettling. So if you look at the sort of the wasteland that's destroyed between 1066 and 1070, it's pretty much a straight line along the English-Welsh border, which makes a lot of sense because there's constant kind of warring along the English-Welsh border both before and after the Norman Conquest. That's not surprising. Then if you filter by destroyed by 1086, so presumably things that were destroyed between 1070 and 1086, yes, there's some stuff in the Midlands that gets destroyed, and there's a few, like, kind of pockets. Portsmouth gets fucked up for some reason. Well, you can see, like,
the only in the 1066 to 1070 map, you can see that like there's some wasted land along the south coast of England. I wonder what that could be from.
Yeah.
And then you can see the Welsh border, but then in 1086, yes, the area around Portsmouth is just completely fucked up for
it
reasons.
Has been ever since.
We get and there's a little bit of southern Cornwall.
Yeah.
But like, and a good chunk of Mercia is wasted, and then just pretty much all of Yorkshire and a big chunk of Lancashire as well.
Yep.
Is just obliterated.
It was really astonishing to see.
And obviously, like, lots of people infer from the term wasted, they're like, oh, that means it was just like smoking ruins. Probably wasn't true. It was probably more like there was, after the harrying, it was just harder. There were fewer people there, and it was harder to make a living because everything had been destroyed.
Yeah, and there were no people to buy from or sell to. So we're not just talking, we get this figure of the population of the North decreased by 75%. And it may well be that wasn't all just people who were murdered or starved to death, but
They just
also
left.
People who left because there was nothing there. You have no family or no friends left, and you can't make it on your own there anymore. And they talk about this in I think Orderic talks about it, or the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, about people like streaming out of the North and basically selling themselves into bondage just to, not die. So it's pretty horrific stuff. That being said, highly recommend checking out the website. I'll link it in the description. And yeah, Anna Powell Smith, I think her name is. She's super cool, super iconic. She does a lot of really good. She does the kind of projects like I wish I had spent time working on and like beefing up my data visualization skills. She's got like one about the Premier League that's really good.
So I'm just cheering myself up after all that genocide talk by looking at a map of salt houses in England.
Yeah, it's,
it's all the coast and then around Birmingham.
It can be really fun just to like, click around and see the little sort of implicit human stories. I mean, and it's a really important like historical document because it's the first time that we hear about a lot of different places in England. Because if you go to any town in England and you go to the like little village museum that they invariably have, on the first room, in the first sign, the first sentence is always invariably, this place was first recorded in the Doomsday Book.
Yeah.
That's how we know that Nottingham was called Snottingham. So yeah, I mean, we've got my neighborhood, Woodford. I actually clicked on like this won't really matter to anyone who's not from Northeast London, but like if you click on the little like 100 or whatever it is, or Hyde, that Woodford, where I live, is part of, then you get like basically all the tube stops that are in like my vicinity. It just says like Walthamstow, Leighton, Chingford, Barking, Havering, and it's like, oh, that's cool. So yeah, I can look and see that 1,000 years ago in Woodford, there were 13 villagers, 17 smallholders, 2 plough teams, 2 lords' plough teams, 7 men's plough teams, 26 acres of meadow, and 500 pigs.
Nice.
And Woodford seems not to have suffered too much in the conquest economically, because there was apparently 1 cow in 1066, and 6 cows, 50 pigs, 100 sheep, and 40 goats on the farmland during that time.
Huzzah.
Yeah, I think the woodland 500 pigs actually just means like woodland to support 500 pigs, which checks out Epping Forest, big forest. So yeah, I highly recommend going and clicking around. It's a cool thing that we have digitally. I was actually reading, before we get into Scotland, this is a slight non sequitur, but I was reading about how the BBC tried to make a new Doomsday Book in 1986 to celebrate the 900-year anniversary of it, and it like failed miserably.
It's fucking hard, man.
Well, their idea was, instead of sending people around to like crowdsource, sort of like, it was good. It was going to be like a kitschy, really cheesy, like, we want to hear from like regular everyday Brits about like their regular everyday life. So like,
oh no, you don't want to do that.
Send us in your photos and your testimony.
No.
And then they collaborated with like all of these now defunct technology companies to develop like a disc and like disc reading and display system to turn it into like a proto video game that basically became obsolete and unusable before they could put it out. And the whole project just completely It was going to be like a really cute thing because they were really targeting schools with it.
Aww.
And they were going to send it around to all of the schools so that they could like browse and see the whole country and like, you know, it would be this sort of beautiful testament to like future generations of bookending 1,000 years of British history, but it didn't work out at all. And there was a huge controversy because they were being Welsh phobic.
First of all, I don't approve of being Welsh phobic. Second of all, who did they get for their tech? Brian Butterfield?
It was genuinely something like that. You can find. I was really like. I didn't want to waste too much time on it, but now that we've recorded, I will waste time on it. But I think you can. I think somewhere you can mirror it or torrent it. I think it's on Internet Archive. I think it's extremely arcane. There's no website. But I think the files are there, so I'll have to figure it out because I did find a website that had like some snippets. And it was a lot of old people being like, in the 1920s, there weren't so many clothing stores.
You know, back in the day, you know, there were fewer buses than there are now.
Exactly, because it was all these people that were being asked, like, oh, what is your day-to-day life like? Well,
I go down shops.
Yeah, that was basically it.
Get pension.
I remember there was someone in Manchester talking about, like, the decline of the tripe sellers. So, yeah.
You know, Raven's not what it fucking used to be. It's a disgrace what's happened. Sorry, I felt him come to me.
No, it was great. It's great. And then they tried to revive it 20 years later which was funny because it made, like, it really hammered home the sort of second Doomsday Book by having, like, testimonies from 20 years apart.
Yeah.
But, again,
it's the year 2006.
Yeah. Anyways, I won't get too much into that. I will need to look it up for myself. But the bottom line is, I think there can be no argument against the idea that William basically took every step that he could to centralize power and to concentrate his control over British people and British land. We won't get into feudalism now, but really I think you can see writ large the foundation of basically the future of like British land ownership and land ownership policy and consolidation of the idea that land is intrinsically linked to power and land is also intrinsically linked to the crown. And so all power flows through the crown.
Yeah, and if you're thinking to yourself as an English person, but I own my house. Maybe read that again.
You might own the house, but you don't own the land.
You have a lease.
You can pick up your house and go whenever you want. That's true.
You're a freeholder, but still.
You're just holding it.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to give it back.
There is his gallant who dies on the field. Let heaven all of it hear and hereafter. Living in death the man who scorns to yield.
With Norman control of England consolidated in the hands of a couple of French guys, essentially, I do just want to turn us now northwards and pick up on a plot thread from the previous episode, which is what on earth happened to the surviving members of the House of Wessex. So as a reminder, yes, Edward the Confessor died in 1066. Yes, Harold Godwinson and his brothers died in 1066. But the children of Edward the Exile, who were the last kind of youthful members of the old royal family of England, did survive 1066 on account of them not fighting, and they escaped all of the chaos, mostly by just moving to Scotland, as one does when one feels England a bit oppressive. That was a little joke for the two of us. So after the harrying of the North, Edgar Atheling, who remember was the Hungarian teenager who Edward the Confessor was considering potentially naming as his heir, but then didn't, fled to Scotland, where his sister Margaret, and I am going to be saying that in that voice because Margaret is like the most like old Scottish lady name imaginable. If actually, a lot of the names that proper nouns that we're going to be using in this part of the episode are going to be, you should hear them as like old dears from Stockbridge. Iona.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
Claire.
So Margaret, okay, I'm going to start with that now. Margaret had married King Malcolm of Scotland in 1070. The chronicles kind of suggest, he was just taken with her, blah, blah, blah. I think she was probably just like, this'll do.
Yeah.
Everything's gone to shit back home. He seems fine, I guess. Before we get into what the members of the House of Wessex were doing in Scotland and what kind and how that shaped the future of Scotland, we need to understand a little bit about what Scotland is in the years leading up to 1066, because it's not the Scotland that we know from the modern day. This is not the Scotland of Scott McTominay and Kenny McLean. Scotland is a really interesting kingdom in the 11th century because A, it's not really a kingdom, and B, it's probably the most diverse place linguistically and culturally in all of the British Isles, I would say. Now, I'm going to do my best to massively simplify a very, very complicated political kind of political and cultural universe down into a single metaphor, which is that Scotland is not like England in the sense that England is a unitary state before and after the Norman Conquest. Scotland is more like a kind of solar system where there is at the center of it is the Kingdom of Alba, right? Which is an Irish-speaking kingdom that's been Irish-speaking since like the 5th century, possibly much longer. And the Kingdom of Alba is sort of centered on what's now the sort of the western seaboard of Scotland, so like Argyll, the Western Highlands. But then there are these kind of other things that are orbiting Scotland, that are in the gravitational pull of the Kingdom of Alba, that are becoming Scotland slowly. So the northeast, what's now the northeast of Scotland, so like Aberdeenshire, Moray, Dundee, stuff like that. Historically, that has been the homeland of the Picts, who are a very interesting, very complicated people who we will do an episode on eventually, who are a different Celtic people of slightly different extraction. They're probably Brittonic, so they're probably related to the Welsh and the Cornish. But they never got conquered by the Romans, so they're doing weird stuff. They spent the last 1,000 years evolving in lots of weird directions and drawing lots of weird things on rocks. But the Picts now, by the 11th century, are being sort of culturally absorbed into Alba. So the Pictish language is dying out, and yet there's still this real level of like political autonomy. So the northeast of Scotland are divided into are ruled by these, which essentially is like equivalent to an earl, who are nominally loyal to the King of Alba, but are sort of, if the Kings of Alba ever try to really fuck with them, they will kill them.
Yeah, like the Earls of England.
Well, that's what Macbeth is about. That's what
the Earls of England.
Well, no, Macbeth is the Mortimer of Murray.
Yeah,
and it's about a sort of power that Macbeth is about a power struggle for the throne of the Kingdom of Alba, which gets retroactively in the play called Scotland because it's easier.
Yeah, and he gets called the Thane.
Yes, well, exactly. And then in the southeast, so what's now sort of the area around Edinburgh and the border region with England, this is just a bit of England that got chopped off about 50 years previously and is still just very much just England. Cue lots of jokes about, Edinburgh's not really Scottish, it's just Englishy. That's right, they've been doing this for the last 1,000 years.
Oh, those bastards.
Yeah, they know who they are. That's what's happening. So in the southeast, you just basically have a bunch of English people who haven't really been integrated into being Scottish at all. And then in the southwest, you have historically you've had the Kingdom of Strathclyde, which is it's a Brittonic-speaking kingdom. It's the last sort of the northern Brittonic kingdoms. So it's, again, they spoke a language called Cumbric, and if it's just now occurring to you that the name Cumbria sounds a bit like the name Cymru, the Welsh name for Wales, congratulations, correct, that is where it comes from.
Yes.
And Strathclyde has sort of been for the last couple centuries, has kind of been the little brother to the Kingdom of Alba. It's the sort of smaller, less powerful kingdom, and yet it has allied itself with Alba against the English, most famously against Athelstan in that big battle they had 150 years ago that I keep referencing. So that is sort of basically what Scotland is at this point. It's chopped up into these 4 quadrants. Even that is a horrific oversimplification, because there are the far north, so what's now Caithness and Sutherland, that's just Vikings.
Yep. Yeah.
Doing Viking stuff.
Very little centralized power. And it kind of gets away with it just because, England, there's so much going on in England. No one is really trying to fuck with Scotland externally.
No.
It's mostly, there's the Vikings, of course, but, Scotland is kind of impervious to complete colonization in a way that England never was.
Well, yeah, because Scotland is just this sort of grab bag of various cultures, of various extractions that have all just kind of been forced to live next to each other.
Amongst mountains of various heights.
But by the 11th century, that is the real turning point where we start to see the kings of Alba asserting more authority. So, Malcolm inherits the kingdom of Strathclyde. So Strathclyde moves sort of firmly under his direct rulership. And the Picts, at this point, again, we think pretty much have died. They haven't died out. They've just mostly married people from Alba, and they've started speaking Irish. But it's still becoming more culturally and politically homogenous, but it is a different universe from what's happening in England.
Yeah.
We're 500 years behind.
It's very magical, actually.
Oh yeah, no, I've pushed against that, but in the previous episodes. But this period of Scottish history is magical. Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's people think it's magical and they're like, oh, we don't have Jesus up here, we just have the fairies, but actually no,
you have Jesus and the fairies.
Yes. No, and also even the people that are the Jesus evangelists are they're very esoteric about it, okay? And I like that. It's not even got anything to do with the fairies. And so while all of this is going on, the church in Scotland and in Ireland, because the Scottish Church is essentially just given to Scotland by the Irish.
St. Columba, etc., etc.
And I think it's also really important to stress, because I'm going to talk about the Gaelic Church.
Yes.
Rather than, say, the Scottish Church or the Celtic Church, because Celtic, I think, to talk of, Celtic people as a group at this point is somewhat pointless, because these people don't have that much in common with, the Cornish.
I think as we'll see later on, the Britons very much understood themselves as a completely different thing from the Irish.
Exactly. And the Irish cultural and religious Christian influence is really important at this point. Anyways, that's just a little preface. Margaret is a huge proponent of sort of bringing Scotland much more in communion with Rome. Because essentially, while this has all been going on, Scotland has been somewhat isolated from the Catholic Church of continental Europe. And they have developed some strange traditions. They have arguably preserved some extremely ancient, potentially Coptic traditions. That's extremely unverified, but some people have said that that's where some of these interesting strains of monasticism and theology come from. So I want to talk about a few things that were quite different. First of all, their tonsure was really weird.
Yes.
We don't know exactly what it looked like. We think maybe they just shaved it all back to, the top of the head. Rather than one circle, it was imagine a headband and just shaving everything in front of the headband. It could have been that.
I've seen some renderings that look like... And by the way, the tonsure, that is the sort of the weird hair that monks have.
Yes.
So traditionally, you have the sort of the halo bald spot.
Yes, that's supposed to sort of recall the crown of thorns.
Yeah. Whereas the Irish, what's called the Irish tonsure, which is is absorbed from Ireland or is absorbed in Scotland sort of via Ireland. It looks fucked up. We don't know what it looked like, but it looked weird.
Exactly.
And it was deeply upsetting to anybody visiting from the Roman Church.
So I think the big thing about what's different between the Scottish Church and the Catholic Church is almost everything, actually. The liturgy is different. The theology is different. They are basically, like, not particularly interested in what Rome and the Pope has to say. And they have, the Gaelic Christians have a distinctly different structure and approach to Christianity than the rest of Europe. And it seems to have been, like, a quite non-hierarchical system whereby, for instance, there are people who would go to Scotland and come back and say, like, oh, these guys don't have, like, bishops or cardinals. They just have, like, different priests, but everyone is the same, and they just, like, elect a new priest to be, like, the top priest at a church. But it's all very permeable, and permeable was the word that I kept reading in conjunction to this, whereas the story of the previous 500 or 800 years of Christianity was this increasing sort of formalization of, like, the priestly class and of the church and churchmen as being distinctly separate from the rest of society. This was not a change that had happened yet in Scotland and Ireland.
I mean, it's a change that is still relatively new on the continent and
Exactly.
is being pursued kind of with great enthusiasm by the successors to Gregory VII, who's the great reformist pope, the sort of the Thomas Cromwell of the 11th century. And his reforms are slowly filtering out, and they've arrived in England. Edward the Confessor was a huge proponent of this. They have not really arrived in the Gaelic world of Ireland and the Kingdom of Alba, which again is... We're using Scotland and Alba kind of interchangeably.
Yeah.
Because Scotus just is an old word that means Irish speaker.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of word that has come to be associated with this type of clergy and this type of church in Scotland and Ireland is the Culdee. This is essentially refers to what Scotland had instead of monks. Was they have, I used the word earlier, intentional community, which is what, like, communes call themselves, but it does kind of feel like that. And
it's exactly like Christiania in Copenhagen.
It was all centered on Iona, which was the sort of nexus of this quasi-monastic tradition that did not involve holy orders or any types of vows or any type of sworn or intended separation from society. But I have a little excerpt from a book about it that I'll read that will hopefully give you an idea.
For context, Iona is an island in the Irish Sea
Yes.
between Scotland and Ireland, and the monastery, in sort of scare quotes, at Iona was hugely influential in spreading Christianity in Scotland in the previous centuries.
Yes, and it was set up by Saint Columba, who was the Irish saint who brought Christianity to Scotland, and then they all got together and brought it all over the place elsewhere. Anyways, the institution set up by Columba has been called a monastery, but in truth, it has no claim to that name. True, the members of the community lived in cells, to which they retired for devotion and study, but this no more made them monks than a similar life makes monks of theological students of our own day. The Culdee recluses were not pledged to celibacy, many of them married. Many of them were succeeded in office by their own sons. They were not dedicated for life to their calling, but were free at any time to change it for another. Their families did not live within the sacred enclosure, but the husbands, their work within being done, passed out to spend the rest of their time with their families. Nor, indeed, was the aim of the institution at all kindred to that of monachism. The monk generally retires for his own improvement solely. He is weary of the world and will have no more contact with it. The monk generally retires for his own improvement solely. He is weary of the world and will have no more contact with it. He renounces it. The Culdee went to Iona that in quiet, with meditation, study, and prayer, he might fit himself for going out into the world as a missionary. Indeed, Iona was a great mission institute where preachers were trained to evangelize the rude tribes of Scotland in a very short time. To have done such a work as this in less than half a century implies apostolic activity, purity, and success. With the exception of the principal men, they must have been much more out of their cells than in them. So essentially, rather than sort of a traditional monastic tradition, what has evolved is this, community of sort of autonomous gospel Bible preachers who go there not, again, to, like, take a specific vow or devote themselves, but to prepare themselves by intimately studying the Bible to then go out into the world and to exist as churchmen spreading the Bible and the Word of God on its own terms, completely detached from the church, capital C, in Rome.
Kind of analogous, but more autonomous from the church to what friars will end up being later on.
And so this is, the thing is, principles of, like, peregrinanism in the way that certain friars, like Franciscan friars, came to embody it, are also credited with having been popularized or sort of established in their current form in Scotland and Ireland. And sort of the modern, like, penitential process or doctrine, or I think it's called a sacrament technically, also originated in Scotland. So before Scotland became, or the Scottish or Gaelic Church entered into communion with Rome, it was much, much more common if you sinned to either have to A, give a public confession, or B, have to do some kind of public penance, like whipping yourself in the village square. And it was the Gaelic church tradition that originated this idea that penance could be something that happens privately between, like, you and your priest and God. So yeah, permeable monasticism, I think, is the sort of word to use. And this isn't to say at all that, like, Scotland or Ireland were these, like, backwaters where, like, the light of God didn't reach, because these people were extremely active. They went all over Europe, and they were extremely committed to the gospel and to the Bible, to the point where even, later on in Europe, there were, like, dedicated Scottish and Irish monasteries in, like, Central Europe, in the Holy Roman Empire.
Well, I was about to say, who was it who imported a bunch of Irish monks to be his sort of intellectual backbone?
Exactly. So these people, I mean,
you have to answer that. That was a year and a half ago.
Oh, Charlemagne?
Yes.
Yeah.
People don't remember.
Sorry. Yeah. And he wasn't the last. And so these guys, they're wicked smart. They know the whole Bible, like, in their heads. And they basically just have these, like, monk training camps. Not even monk, but, like, priest training camps back at home.
Yeah, and these Irish monks, which, again, I think we've set up enough to be able to use the word monk, and people understand what we mean. These culties, these Irish monks, were very influential in the early stages of sort of proselytizing among the sort of the Anglo-Saxons, and making them Christians. It's just that there's a key point, and I think the 7th century, where England sort of starts to diverge and becomes more Roman in its sort of approach to Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. And, if, like, the Scottish approach, the culty lifestyle, sounds, more reasonable and sustainable and sort of holistic than the Roman Catholic lifestyle, well, that doesn't matter.
You might be a Unitarian.
Well, yeah, that too. I was going to say, well, too bad, because the Pope doesn't like it.
Yeah, and it's this. I'm not going to say that the sort of the Reform movement that's bubbling away in Rome at the 11th century, that it's a response to what's happening in Ireland and Scotland. What's happening in Ireland and Scotland is symptomatic of a wider situation where there are different approaches to Christianity and to the organization of the church that are not standardized, that are particular to regions and particular to countries. And this is just a sort of local manifestation of that that's particular to the Gaelic world. So that was a bit of a cul-de-sac that we went down, talking about Irish monasticism in Ireland and Scotland. But it's incredibly important context to understand the world in which Margaret of Scotland found herself when she married the King of Scots in 1070, because she was very much a devout Catholic. She was very committed to the ideals of the Reform movement, and Malcolm, her husband, who was a sort of grizzled warlord who probably couldn't even read, he wasn't really that bothered about the church, and so he sort of devolved all that stuff to her, which I think is really sweet. Malcolm and Margaret are a great partnership in power.
Yeah, I know, it's sweet.
He's the sort of like, again, like very tenacious, very cunning politician who's made his way in the bear pit of 11th century British politics, and she's the deeply sincere, sort of ideologically committed one, and they managed to balance out quite well. And she basically forced the Scottish Church to adopt reforms, become more Catholic, essentially. But she also, she did my favorite type of thing, which she introduced accessible public transit. Do you know about this?
No. Oh yeah, the Queen's Ferry. The Queen's Ferry of Queensferry.
So for context, the point there are two villages on either side of the Firth of Forth, just west of Edinburgh, called North Queensferry and South Queensferry, and it's essentially where the Forth Rail Bridge is now. And the reason why they're both called Queensferry is because that was the route of a free ferry that Margaret set up for pilgrims who wanted to visit the bishopric of St Andrews, which is north of Edinburgh in Fife, over the Firth of Forth. She also seems to have been she's very big on the sort of public displays of poverty. So she would serve food to orphans every day before she ate, and she was very much all about supporting the poor. Now, we have to put a caveat on this, which is that Margaret would get canonized later, and so a lot of these details come from the sort of hagiography of her, the saint's life. And so it's possible this was embellished, but at the core of the story is a truth.
I believe it.
She was
I believe it all. I think she was a nice lady.
She was a nice lady who loved Jesus and thought it should be done properly. But she had another really, really important effect on Scottish culture and Scottish life, which is that she was a very much publicly an English queen. I mean, there had been English people and English noblewomen in the Scottish court before this, but she was probably the most sort of, in part probably because of the amount of sort of freedom that Malcolm kind of gave her. She was arguably the most visibly English queen Scotland had ever had. And also, this is a point where Scotland is trying to integrate in the southeast, again, this large kind of community of people who almost certainly thought of themselves as Northumbrians who happened to be basically as temporarily embarrassed English people.
What is a Scotsman by? No, just kidding.
Boo. And so she encouraged the use of English at the royal court, and imported a bunch of English people to work for her and Malcolm and serve them in the court, which was quite unpopular with some of the more sort of traditional Gaelic elites who are like, this is unacceptable. Who are these people? They can't even speak the Queen's Irish. There's one last thing that Margaret did, which is that she had a lot of sex. Because she had 7 children in the next 20 years.
Sex 7 times, at least? That's slag.
And this was in addition, by the way, to his 2 sons from his previous marriage. So, there's a big family, and interestingly, she names most of these children with, very traditionally Anglo-Saxon names that you've already heard about. So, names like Edmund, Edgar, and yes, Ethelred. And while this is all happening, by the way, so she's having a grand old time creating ferries and reforming the church, and hanging out with her cool husband, and then her loser brother is also hanging around. So Edgar Atheling, I have a real pathos for him. Do you also feel this way?
Yeah, no, I do.
Because not only was he the king for 6 days and then never crowned and then had to, kiss the toes of this disgusting French genocidal maniac.
Yeah.
But then he became the face of a rebellion that he then ran away from, and as a result of that got tens of thousands to possibly up to 100,000 people fucking killed.
Yep.
And then he spends the next the next 20 years just sort of bouncing around between England and Scotland. He goes to Italy for a bit. He might have participated in the First Crusade. He's just kind of hanging around. You get the sense that he's kind of aimless.
Yeah.
And I really do feel like he's at this point, by the late 11th century, he's like a kind of loser, middle-aged fuck-up.
Yeah. He is. He's a little bit. He's like your weird uncle who you kind of keep around because he's fallen on hard times. He's divorced.
Like I
She
can
took the
imagine.
kids.
I can imagine Margaret going to Malcolm and being like, "Malcolm, can my brother stay? Fuck off."
Not that cunt.
Last time you drank the fucking salad dry. You're just gonna hang out here for 6 months, be rude to everyone, and then leave.
And eat all my tatty scones.
I do like to imagine him as I think Edgar Atheling at this point. I think he's not bald, but he is balding.
He's got the comb over, surely. And it's not hiding much.
It seems like everything is happily ever after for Margaret. She's managed to avoid, the complete disillusion of the entire Anglo-Saxon nobility. Her idiot brother is visiting every so often, but that's manageable. Until in the 1090s. So as we talked about way back in episode 2, Malcolm very much had designs on conquering the northern reaches of Northumbria and sort of annexing more of northern England. And so in 1091, he leads an army south and besieges the Northumbrian city of Durham. Now, this is after the death of William the Conqueror. He's been replaced by a man called William Rufus, another member of William's family, who was forced to march north and essentially chase Malcolm back to Scotland. And the two kings agreed this truce, that they're not going to fuck with each other for a bit, which holds for 2 years until Malcolm's like, "What if I did, though?" And besieges Alnwick, which is another town in Northumbria. However, a man called Robert de Mowbray, who is the Earl of Northumbria, manages to essentially catch the besiegers off guard. He manages to essentially surprise them somehow and basically just smash them into the walls of Alnwick Castle. And in the melee, both Malcolm and his designated heir, Prince Edward, are killed. And when Margaret hears the news, she dies a few days later, apparently of a broken heart.
Aww.
I know, she's such a sweetie. But the problem is with Edward dead, there's no heir apparent. And so Scotland descends into a very complicated civil war, which I've condensed here because it hurts my head to even read this much. The throne is then seized by a man called Donald Bane. Donald Bane is the Donald Bane from Macbeth. Again, this is a sequel to Macbeth. Donald is he's the elderly son of the, at this point, long dead Duncan. And so Donald has the Normans and Englishmen who had been appointed to the royal court by Margaret and Malcolm kicked out of the country. And some chronicles even say that Donald was planning to have Margaret's children killed and essentially snuff out the rival royal line until Edgar Atheling spirited them away to England himself. So he gets to have a hero moment, which I think is quite nice. So Edgar then immediately is like, well, this cannot stand. Finally, I've got something to do. I can be useful. So he goes and petitions William Rufus to essentially get some help to depose Donald Bane. And William Rufus does encourage Malcolm's eldest surviving son, so this is the surviving son from the previous marriage, to depose Donald Bane. But Donald Bane and that son, the son of Malcolm, who is the potential heir apparent, is called Duncan, no relation to the Duncan who's the father of Donald Bane. Everybody following along? So Duncan, backed by England, goes up against Donald. Donald manages to defeat and kill Duncan, and he survives on the throne. until 1097, when an English army marches up and deposes him, and that English army is led by Edgar Atheling. So Edgar Atheling, in the strangest, weirdest twist of fate, does manage to save the House of Wessex from being snuffed out, just not in England.
Yeah.
We still out here. So, with Edgar and William Rufus's support, Margaret's eldest surviving son, Edgar, gets placed on the throne. And so finally we have a direct descendant of Alfred the Great back on a throne. It's just not the throne of England.
Yeah.
So, and Edgar Atheling, against all the odds, has saved his family's line, which is kind of crazy, because it was not looking up for him. He now exits the historical narrative.
God bless him.
We're going to leave him there in his moment of triumph.
And God bless Scotland. Onwards.
Yes. So when Edgar dies, King Edgar, he passes the throne of Scotland to his brother Alexander, but he also grants the rule of the former kingdom of Strathclyde and then a little bit of Cumbria, which remember has been was annexed by what Malcolm fucking 500 episodes ago.
That was a custody battle, okay?
Well, he was in a custody battle with Tostig Godwinson, remember?
Listen,
and
Cumbria.
He just picked Tostig Godwinson up and just sort of swung him around.
Your father and your father are splitting. You're going to have to choose which one you want to go with.
Yeah. So Edgar gives Strathclyde and Cumbria to their younger brother David, who gets the title Prince of the Cumbrians. So David is a really interesting character. He is the youngest son. He's very clearly not meant to be king. He got sent to the royal court of England to just be like, let's have this guy around in England as a kind of as a sort of voice in the king's ear. And he apparently picked up a lot of Anglo-Norman ideas about government and religion and culture. So William of Malmesbury, who we've quoted a few times, says about David that he rubbed up all of rubbed off all of the tarnish of Scottish barbarity through being polished by intercourse and friendship with us.
Who's getting rubbed off by intercourse and polishing their... What? That's classic French degeneracy.
So, in 1113, Henry gives David the earldom of Huntingdon, which is a very wealthy earldom, which is essentially a couple of parcels of land in Bedfordshire, Huntingdonshire, and Northampton. And this makes him deeply wealthy. There's a bunch of mining in the earldom that essentially he can just monetize. And he becomes a very powerful man in English politics, who is kind of... Because remember, he is descended from the old royal house of England, but is kind of brought up in this Norman environment, kind of straddles the divide of English politics. But again, as the youngest of 8 sons, he probably thought, there's no way I'm gonna have to worry about being king of Scotland. That's not I can just be a wealthy English nobleman and just have a chill life forever. Except for the fact that when Alexander, so again, remember his older brother dies in 1124, the English king essentially goes, I like you and trust you. You're going to be the king, and if any Scottish noblemen object to that, they can deal with me, the Norman king of England, the most terrifying sentence imaginable. So David gets appointed in 1124, despite both Duncan, so both Duncan and Alexander, so his older brothers, having living sons. So David is in a way like his mother, is a huge supporter of the church and of the papal reform movement, and he very much promotes the very traditional, very Roman ideas about monasticism within Scotland. He's a big fan of the Cistercian order. He's building lots of monasteries and proper monasteries. None of this weird hippy dippy Christiania stuff. He also has lots of reforms to the system of government that make Scotland a lot more like England. So he introduces sheriffs, which again is a royal office that's existed in England since the time of Ethelred the Unready, to the southeast of Scotland. He also creates Scotland's first boroughs. So these are the first real urban centers. A borough is just it just means a town in this context, but it's a town with a kind of royal approval for certain kinds of commerce to happen in it. And this is a big deal because Scotland hasn't had towns. It's just kind of had farms and forts. And those were good enough.
F and F. The
Yep.
two Fs of Scotland.
The two Fs of Scotland. Now, of course, urban life attracts a certain type of person. And not just the owners of this not just the creators of this podcast. But essentially what he does to kind of kickstart the economic growth of these towns is he imports a bunch of Northumbrians, a bunch of people from the towns of Northumbria, to settle in these boroughs. And these boroughs are not just in the sort of historic core of English-speaking people in the southeast of Scotland. They're now everywhere that these towns are being founded. And these towns are being founded in places that you will know. Places like Perth, not Australia, Edinburgh, and Stirling. And what this does is it means that English starts to spread outside. The use of the English language in public life starts to spread outside of its historic base in the southeast and starts to be spoken all across the country. It's still very much the north of Scotland, the old kingdom of Alba, the northeast, still very much Gaelic and will be for hundreds and hundreds of years. But this is the beginning of the process of Scotland becoming an English-speaking country. Or a predominantly English-speaking country, I should say.
Yeah.
Because we still have BBC Alba. That, for non-UK listeners, is the Gaelic language TV channel in Scotland, and this is a complete tangent. If you ever want to just hang out, just chill out, and have a nice time, throw on BBC Alba. They will have like a very gentle documentary about shipbuilding
Or crofting.
they love crofting.
They love crofting. Folks, we love... How do you say
We
that
love
in
running.
Gaelic?
A very gentle documentary about 19th century textile manufacturers in Gaelic, but like subtitled in English.
Or, a kid's show with a budget of 25 quid per episode that's mostly been spent on pipe cleaners and clay.
I love BBC Alba. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it really is.
Twice a year, there'll be like the hit new Gaelic language drama.
Yeah.
And it's just people in rooms talking in Gaelic.
Yep, on an island.
Anyway.
They're never like in Paris, I want like a spy drama about like a Gaelic speaking spy cell that goes undercover to infiltrate the Grand Wizard of the Scottish Freemasons.
I would fucking watch that. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It would.
He also fights this as part of a sort of project to bring Scotland into this sort of into becoming a unitary state. David fights this brutal war in the northeast to bring these Mortimers, these like independent earls, under the thumb of the Scottish crown properly for the first time. And all of this kind of transformation, which is not a sort of, he doesn't replace the elite in the way that the Normans did. Like, if there was a Doomsday Book equivalent in Scotland, you would not see, like, what you see in the Doomsday Book data set, which is lands held before 1066, 0, lands held after 1066, 500.
Name Guillaume de Fauvonbon de Chambedom de Pomperbon.
A very authentically English name, of course.
Yep.
But what you do see is a lot of churn. People who oppose David are getting deposed, and whenever those opportunities arise, he will appoint one of his friends. And many of these people are not just from England, but they are from the continent as well. So he brings over a lot of elite families from the continent, from Flanders, from Normandy, and from Brittany. And a lot of these families are the families that 300 years later are going to be the critical players in Scottish politics. So the names you may recognize from our Wars of Independence episode include the Balliols, the Commons, and yes, even the Bruces. David I of Scotland managed to transform Scotland in much the same way that William and his successors managed to transform England by force, but he did it mostly diplomatically and with a little bit of force. Wales is such a fundamentally different story to either of those. So as a reminder, to the west of England are a collection of small kingdoms that belong to a people who we now call Welsh in English, or in Welsh they call themselves Cymru. They very much called themselves at the time the Britons, because they were the original Brittonic inhabitants of Britain.
Mate, I'm British. What the fuck are you?
What are you doing here? And the sense in which the Britons / the Welsh very much saw themselves as not just the rightful sort of owners of the island of Britain, but also the rightful inheritors to the Roman Empire in Britain, cannot be overstated. There was a king, Gruffydd ap Llywelyn, who managed to unite all of these small kingdoms and principalities under his leadership, but he was deposed by an English army led by the Godwinson brothers, Harold and Tostig, in 1063 and assassinated. After Gruffydd ap Llywelyn died, Wales once again fell apart into this constellation of... I'm not even going to try and count the number of kingdoms, because, and this will become even more of an issue with Ireland, there's no consistency as to what counts as a king. And some people are kings of multiple kingdoms at the same time, and there are kings who are the sub-kings of other kings. But broadly speaking, there are kind of 4 vague regions of Wales to keep track of, right? There's Gwynedd in the north, Deheubarth in the west, in the south we've got Morgannwg and Powys in the center. And these kingdoms, the nature of Welsh politics from the 9th, the 11th century is just absolutely fratricidal. It's just these guys killing each other over increasingly small patches of land. There's a Gruffydd ap Llywelyn allegedly famously said, to justify his use of force to unify Wales into one kingdom, said, "Speak not to me of killing. I merely blunt the horns of the children of Wales, so they do not harm their mother."
Wow.
It's a really cool line.
Fucking hell.
And Wales is this, from an English point of view in the 11th century, Wales is this kind of like amorphous borderland where you can just disappear, right? It's kind of like Harold Hardrada going east. And so a lot of Anglo-Saxon nobles fled to Wales from Mercia after the Norman Conquest. Raiding parties from Wales linked up with and supported Anglo-Saxon resistance to William the Conqueror, especially between 1066 and 1070. That's one of the reasons why, as we were talking about before, the border with Wales is just full of wasted kind of estates. Wales having this long, permeable border with England and having, in some capacity, vaguely aligned itself with the Anglo-Saxon resistance made it essentially a huge political problem for William the Conqueror and his successors, because it's essentially like, well, now there's this gigantic dagger essentially pointed at the heartland of England. We need to do something about this. So the first thing that William the Conqueror does from 1066 after conquering England is he creates this new line of earldoms at Chester, at Shrewsbury, and at Hertford the job of these earldoms and these earls is literally just keep the Welsh out, keep the western border stable.
We have to defend the West.
Yeah. There's another joke They're coming over the border.
Yeah.
They're bringing crime. They're bringing cakes.
They're bringing poetry.
They're bringing rarebit. Nobody knows what it is. And these earls start building castles. Now, initially, these castles, and remember, these castles, as we've talked about previously, castles are not just a defensive structure; they're a form of outward-facing social control because they're a place that you sally out from if you want to go and terrorize the local villagers. So initially, these castles are being built by these Western earldoms on the English side of the border. But in the years after 1066, they start to kind of probe a little bit with raids crossing over the Welsh border. There's no wall along the English-Welsh border. There's a ditch. There's a multi-century-old ditch that is surmountable. It's a pain in the ass, but it is surmountable, even at this point. And these raids are intended to sort of discourage further Welsh support for English rebels. And so, unsurprisingly, Rhys ap Tudor, who's the king of Deheubarth, agrees to pay William homage in exchange for basically leaving him alone. Then, in 1081, William leads it's called in the Anglo-Saxon an armed pilgrimage through Wales to essentially go to Wales's holiest site, which is the Shrine of St. David. It doesn't get a lot of attention in either the Welsh sources or the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, but it's a clear kind of early statement of intent. Like, just so we're all clear, I could come and fuck you up at any time. And this is as far as William the Conqueror gets personally towards really invading Wales in the course of his life, probably because he's like, well, I got England. I don't really care about this bit.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there wasn't what we now call a Norman invasion of Wales. And I want to, when I'm describing how the Normans behave in Wales, I want to cast our minds back to what they were doing a generation previously in southern Italy, which is essentially individual Norman sort of adventurers and bands of adventurers setting up castles at strategic points in the landscape and using them as ways to build your own very hyper-local power bases that then get consolidated into bigger political communities and finally to a Norman-led kind of duchy of southern Italy. So just keep that in your mind as I'm describing what happens next. So, like I said, the Norman invasion of Wales doesn't take the form of a large state-directed attack on Wales. Again, there's nothing like what Tostig and Harold did. But instead, these earls on the western border start getting more and more adventurous in their raids into Wales, and they actually start building castles, this time on the Welsh side of the border, and they start pushing their luck. And they start in the southeast, but eventually they start doing the same thing in Gwynedd and Powys. Each of the kingdoms of Wales has a different experience of this. I do want to focus in as a case study on the life of Gruffydd ap Conan, who was a claimant to and then king of Gwynedd in the 11th century, because he's a great example of how did the Welsh kings have to sort of navigate these kind of basically what is this advancing, slow marching Norman gradual annexation. So who is Gruffydd ap Conan? Well, Gruffydd ap Conan was born in Dublin. We will get back to Dublin. Who was the son of an exiled claimant to the throne of Gwynedd, and possibly to a Norse princess as well. Gruffydd first made an attempt to claim the throne of Gwynedd in 1075, when Bleddyn, the king who had been installed as king of Gwynedd by Harold and Tostig a decade previously, died. And to try and claim this throne, Gruffydd actually goes to the local Norman lord. There's a guy called Robert of Ruthen, and Robert provides him with troops to help him fight back another claimant called Treheran ap Caradog. But Treheran manages to defeat Gruffydd, and Gruffydd flees back to Ireland, right? Well, that wasn't a weird cul-de-sac. Why did we talk about this? Well, we did it because whilst Gruffydd is away, Robert of Rutland takes advantage of the Civil War to invade Gwynedd and basically conquer and chop off the eastern third of the kingdom and building a shitload of castles to consolidate his position. Meanwhile, so Gruffydd makes an alliance with Rhys ap Tudor, who we mentioned before, and tries again to take the throne in 1081, this time with an army of Welshmen, Irishmen, and Danes. This time, he is successful, defeating Treheran at the Battle of Myrdd Carn. However, after becoming king, he gets a sort of friendly welcome. He's like, welcome to the neighborhood, from the Earls of Chester and Shrewsbury, who say, come to dinner with us. It'll all be very above board. And then they immediately imprison him.
Of course.
And Robert of Rutland is now appointed as governor of all of Gwynedd. So, Gruffydd is then imprisoned for 16 years. And I should say, I'm going to quote now a little bit from one of our best sources we have for any Welsh prince in the sort of early to sort of high Middle Ages, which is a text called The History of Gruffydd ap Conan, which is a delightfully sort of it's a delightfully flowery text, and I really enjoy it. So the history describes the story of how he breaks out of prison after 16 years. A young man came to Chester, and a few companions with him, to buy necessity. When he saw him, i.e. Gruffydd, fettered in the city square, he took him upon his shoulders and bore him away unperceived.
Whoa.
I feel like a guy giving a piggyback ride to a guy in chains would be perceived, but that's just me.
Maybe they were wearing a really big cloak, and they just looked like one really big guy. One really big, strong guy.
Big, powerful guys.
Yeah.
I love these Welsh guys.
I love Griffith and David.
And journeyed he and his companions in the afternoon, where the burgesses were eating, and maintained him in his own house for a number of days secretly. So Gruffydd then spirits again away back to Dublin, where the King of Dublin gives him another fleet, which he uses to attack the island of Inismon, which is a big island in the Irish Sea between Wales and Ireland. So the history then describes the attack on Inismon. Then there was a fierce, cruel, severe battle from morning till afternoon, and many fell from both sides, and the bravest first. And in their midst Gruffydd leapt forward in the foremost troop to cleave the armoured and helmeted French with his double-edged axe, like King David among the Philistines. And so by 1094, there are massive rebellions have started all across Wales against these kind of Norman castles and Norman encroachment. And so Gruffydd, after the Battle of Inismon, becomes this symbol of resistance, and Welshmen start flocking to his cause. And so in 1095, William Rufus, who is king,
Yep.
remember him? We're jumping back and forward in history. William Rufus decides, I can't do this. And so he sends an army to subjugate the Welsh. However, Gruffydd leads essentially a campaign of guerrilla warfare, of just retreating against the English, forcing the Normans to sort of turn back. And according to the history, this is fantastic. According to the history, this is the quote about how it went for the English king. He did not take with him any kind of profit or gain, except one cow.
Wow, humble.
So in 1095, Gruffydd 1095 has owned the English.
Yes.
1098, the Earls of Chester and Shrewsbury again decide, we gotta do something about this. Who will rid me of this perfidious Welshman? And so they send a large army, which this time does manage to chase Gruffydd out of Gwynedd. However, he returns a year later, seemingly as part of an agreement with the Earls where he will get to rule Inismon and they'll get the rest of Gwynedd.
Nice.
He then gets a leg up when there is a complete deus ex machina in the story, which is Magnus Barefoot, the King of Norway, grandson of Harald Hardrada, just sails down the Irish Sea, completely unrelatedly, and just shoots the Earl of Shrewsbury.
Damn.
And the history calls this an act of God, and honestly, fair enough. I can't really explain it. And so Gruffydd is able to consolidate his position and expand the kingdom of Gwynedd to most of its former size, but still has, like, lost a huge chunk of territory. So at the end of the 11th century, this is kind of the story of Wales. The west of Wales is still independent in this sort of patchwork of kingdoms, but the south and the east has been taken over by these Norman lords who have been building their own kind of independent principality. What's interesting is that William and his successors made no effort to integrate these new Norman kind of territories into the Kingdom of England. Instead, these became what were known as the Marcher lordships. So March just means border area, like sort of vague border zone, and lordship means lordship. And these guys were pretty much independent. These were Norman lords who, according to the 15th century calendar of patent rolls, they enjoyed all royal rights, prerogatives, and customs belonging to royal lordships, and all royal courts and other jurisdictions, including an authentic seal for commissions, writs warrants, and powers of appointing justices to hold sessions in ear and other sessions and courts. So basically, there are these collection of little, like, tiny Norman kingdoms taking over Wales. And we start to, within the territory of the Marcher lordships, remember, is the sort of the eastern border area, and then the south. We start to see a couple of major changes. So the Normans found a lot of new towns and settlements, either as entirely new towns or sort of redevelopments of existing villages. And a lot of Wales's most famous towns, places like Swansea, Newport, and yes, the capital city of Cardiff, are either founded or refounded by the Normans. And as in Scotland, these settlements were fed by, at least initially, massive English immigration. The first English immigration into Wales since the English sort of first showed up in Britain 500 years previously. And what's funny is, if you look at a map of Marcher lordships at the end of the Middle Ages, and you look at a map of where Welsh is predominantly spoken, in Wales now, it is pretty much a mirror image. Like, the places where Welsh is strongest is, well, where the Welsh language is strongest are almost universally the areas that were not conquered by the Normans in the 11th century. And this new arrangement where you have lots of, like, Normans and lots of English people moving into Wales creates a new class of people who historians call the Cambro-Normans, after Cambria, which is a sort of archaic name for Wales. And these are people who are born in Wales but have mixed Welsh, English, or Norman heritage. Now, we've met quite a few of these people before, so people like Geoffrey of Monmouth and Walter Map probably were Anglo-Norman or Cambro-Norman. But I want to focus on one guy called Gerald of Wales. Gerald of Wales is apparently, according to a BBC poll in 2004, is Wales's 88th favourite Welshman.
Whoa.
I know. He was a churchman, a writer, and a historian who was descended from Norman aristocracy, but had a sort of vague family relationship to the old Welsh nobility. He was born in the mid sort of 1140s, and he may have been descended from Rhys ap Tudor. Now, despite the fact that he was pretty much, except for his mother's side, mostly just Norman, he identified incredibly strongly as a Welsh patriot and was a really strong advocate for Welsh independence culturally, and also for the Welsh church independence as well. He was a big advocate for making St. David's an archbishopric, so putting it on the level with Canterbury and York. So he wrote primarily in Latin, not in Welsh, but what he did write was ferociously patriotic. So he wrote various books about Wales. One of them was called The Description of Wales, which, I mean, that is what it is.
Wait, what was it about?
Cetaceans. It's like Moby Dick. In the Description of Wales, he describes, you'll never guess, Wales and England. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this. The English fight for power, the Welsh for liberty, the one to procure gain, the other to avoid loss. The English hirelings for money, the Welsh patriots for their country. Hence, during the military expedition which King Henry II made in our days against South Wales, an old Welshman at Pencadir, who had faithfully adhered to him, being desired to give his opinion about the royal army, and whether he thought that the rebels would make resistance, and what would be the final event of the war, replied, "This nation, O king, may now, as in former times, be harassed, and in a great measure weakened and destroyed by your and other powers, and it will often prevail by its laudable exertions, but it can never be totally subdued through the wrath of man, unless the wrath of God do concur. Nor do I think that any other nation than this of Wales, or any other language, whatever may hereafter come to pass, shall in the day of severe examination before the supreme judge answer for this corner of the earth." Unfortunately, the other thing about Gerald of Wales is that he was deeply racist against Irish people.
Yeah, he was racist. I think it's important to say that when we say he was racist, we meant in the modern sense, like Hitler.
No, we didn't say that. Even sarcastic. I just like that Gerald of Wales is like the most French man ever. It's like, I love being Welsh.
Yeah.
J'adore la reverberate.
J'adore le daffodil.
Sleeping or waking, till the silent unchanged dream reign.
So, Ireland. A lot of the ways in which Ireland is culturally different from Britain we've already talked about, because the Kingdom of Alba was basically just like an extension of Ireland. I mean, there are some king lists in Irish annals that just say that Alba is just Ireland. It doesn't, like, there's no cultural distinction. Ireland is interesting because, like Wales, it's sort of splintered into this small and constantly shifting set of petty kingdoms. And those kingdoms, within themselves, are comprised of kingdoms, and it's a headache. It's like everywhere, if you zoom in, you just see more kingdom. In theory, this whole, like, smorgasbord is overseen by a guy called the High King, who is an over-king who is sort of responsible for peace and good governance across the island. This is really just a sort of first among equals. It's a bauble. It doesn't really mean anything. Interesting. The High King is an interesting institution. It's an institution that allegedly sort of stretches back not only into the pagan past of Ireland, but into the mythological past. Like, the oldest king lists place the earliest high kings between 2,500 and 3,000 years before the Normans show up in England in 1066. It's a long fucking time. Ireland has been doing Irish things for a really long time. And Ireland is also this sort of... Ireland is this in this period, is this very rural society, sort of punctuated by these great monasteries, who, as we've talked about, are quite weird by European standards. And they had been, the Irish Church had been one of the problem children of the European churches for a long time. In the 7th century, they had to get threatened with excommunication in order to accept the Roman dating of Easter. We truly cannot get into that.
Yeah, no.
Essentially, what do you do if Easter...
No. No. Onwards.
And of course, like in Britain, the Vikings show up. So Dublin is a Viking settlement that sort of evolved into its sort of independent Viking kingdom that sort of coexisted with the other Irish kingdoms, because unlike in England, there wasn't a single state that was ready to sort of absorb the Vikings. And just like Scotland and Wales, Ireland in 1066 absorbed a huge number of Anglo-Saxon refugees, including several of Harold Godwinson's sons, who used it as a base to do raids sort of ineffectually for a few years.
The Godwin grandsons. The Godwin grandsons.
Yes, the Godwin son sons.
The Godwin son sons.
And so Ireland is a kind of pain, but it's not a huge issue for William. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle has this weird kind of line where it says that if William had lived 2 more years, he would have conquered Ireland by his prudence and without any weapons, which sort of suggests that it was on his agenda, but he was too, like, bluntly, he was too gassy and dying.
I mean, yeah, he wasn't that old when he died, but
No.
I don't know if we've really talked about his death properly in this episode.
It's pretty unpleasant. Let's do it here.
I mean, it's not... I don't think we know that many specifics about it, but he just seems like his body is, like, giving out. Like,
Yeah.
he just gets sick, and he's dragging his fucking cadaver around.
I mean,
like,
yeah, he's deeply ill. He gets hugely fat.
Yeah.
He's like, and then his like, there are like various when he has died, there are various kind of pratfalls with the coffin that make people think, I think this might not have been a good guy.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well and very symbolic to me that it happens the year after the Doomsday Book is completed, like,
Yeah.
just as he sort of closes the cover on this chapter of, like, fucking ruthlessly seizing and extracting power and wealth. Like, so is he also closing the lid on his own coffin. He killed him. You know, he would have lived to 85, maybe 86, if he hadn't done all that.
If he'd just been capable of being normal.
If he could just be normal with his wife, who was a nice lady. Little intense, but she was a nice lady. He would have lived to a riper, older age than 59.
Well, he was pretty ripe when he died. His body filled up with gas. And it stank out the entire cathedral.
Oh, who among us?
He wasn't, look, I do like lots of people were like, I wonder if this suggests that he might not have been a nice person.
I mean, could that have been a little bit of a retcon? Is that a little bit too
Oh,
on the
that's
nose?
right there up there with the child Ethelred the Unready shitting on St. Dunstan.
Oh, they do love body excretions.
Yeah.
Those medieval allegorists.
So many decades pass with Ireland being basically unmolested until 1166. So in 1166, the High King of Ireland is a guy called Ruairi O'Connor. And he decides to lead a coalition of other Irish kings to depose the King of Leinster, which is the kingdom in the southeast, south of Dublin, basically, called Dermot MacMurrough. What?
Sorry, I just like Irish people. I'm not going to laugh at any more Irish names.
Well, these are the anglicized versions, because I didn't want to make you say...
The Aramad.
Yeah. Look, I have a fucking Gaelic name as well. You think I don't know that Irish has a different phonetics than English? Please don't write in.
Our listeners don't, judging by the number of people that write in and call you Aaron.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I have an Irish name. It means bread. Moving on. So Dermot then goes, well, okay. So the highest authority in Ireland has told me to go fuck myself. What if I appeal to the highest authority in England, who by then is the King Henry II? So Henry is like, all right, well, I'm not going to get involved, but you can go and recruit mercenaries from my kingdom if you want, if you really want to do this. And so Dermot goes to the Earl of Pembroke. So this is one of these Welsh marcher lords that I've been talking about, who went by the name of Strongbow.
Yes, like the cider. I don't know why I did a West Country accent. It's just so easy to say cider.
Cider.
As if you're a man from fucking Devon. But yeah, that's what it's named, and that is straight what it's named after. So in this, whatever you may or may not have taken from this series, at least you learned where Bluetooth comes from, and at least you learned where Strongbow cider comes from. And if you're not British and you've never had Strongbow cider, this is not for you. Just skip forward 10 seconds.
You don't have any of the cultural reference points to understand why that's funny.
Exactly.
All I have to say, Strongbow Dark Fruits was a very important part of my early drinking experiences.
Exactly.
So Dermot, as part of his sort of efforts to recruit Strongbow and other marcher lords to support him, he says that Strongbow can be his heir to the Kingdom of Leinster. This will not be important and will have no ramifications for Irish history. So a small Norman force lands in southern Ireland, sort of under the direction of Strongbow, and they quickly capture Wexford and a lot of southern Leinster. And Ruairi O'Connor's like, all right, fine, fuck. So the High King restores Dermot as King of Leinster in exchange for Dermot sort of re-recognizing Ruairi as High King. However, Dermot clearly gets it into his head over the following year that, wait a minute, I have all these Norman allies. What if I use them to make me the High King? Which, again, since we're tying lots of bows on this series, one of the lessons is, don't fucking use Norman mercenaries. They're just going to come and steal your house. Anyway, so Strongbow arrives in 1070 with a much larger Norman army, nominally to kind of get to support Dermot in his claim to being High King. And they march on Dublin and capture Dublin very easily, in part because while Dermot is trying to negotiate with the King of Dublin, a bunch of Normans are just like, what do you mean you're negotiating? We could just go and kill them. And then they do that. So with Dublin and Leinster under his control, Dermot is now the king of basically the southwestern corner, quarter of the entire island of Ireland. And he starts launching these raids into the Kingdom of Meath. However, in May 1171, Dermot... You know what's coming!
Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave this as an exercise to the listener. So Dermot has brought this incredibly powerful Norman warlord on hand to support him, has brought him into essentially his house, and has named him as his heir.
Vaxxed?
So Dermot mysteriously dies.
Dermot gets vaxxed.
And Strongbow inherits the Kingdom of Leinster. So Ruairi returns later in the year and is like, okay, well, we can't have a Norman. We obviously can't have a Norman king ruling half of Ireland. And so he sends a 60,000 strong army to besiege Dublin. And seems like the Normans are done for, mate. Except for they're just like, fuck. Once again, in true Norman fashion, they go, well, fuck it, let's be legends. And in the middle of the night, they send their army out, attack the Irish camp, kill about 1,000 of people, and cause so much commotion and so much panic that the Irish army just dissipates and flees. At this point, Henry II, who's been watching all of this sort of presumably with bemusement and some concern that this guy might be slightly too competent to be kept on a leash, decides to intervene. So in 1171, he lands in Ireland to sort of like resolve what the situation is going to be. And he does so on the basis of an authority granted to him by a papal bull supposedly issued by the Pope Adrian in 1155, known as the Laudabiliter. Now, this is a very controversial document. It is probably fraudulent because it never materializes at any point in any histories prior to 1171. But what it says is, I'll read the relevant part of the text. You have indeed indicated to us, dearly beloved Son in Christ, that you wish to enter the island of Ireland, to make that people obedient to the laws, and to root out from there the weeds of vices, that you are willing to pay St. Peter the annual tax of 1 penny from each household, and to preserve the rights of the churches and that land intact and unimpaired. We therefore support your pious and praiseworthy intention with favour which it deserves, and, granting our benevolent consent, we consider it pleasing and acceptable that you should enter that island for the purpose of enlarging the boundaries of the church, checking the descent of wickedness, correcting morals, and implanting virtues, and encouraging the growth of the faith in Christ. So basically...
Wow, your voice really changed over the course. You got, like, old.
It's been a long session. the king establishes the new institution called the Lordship of Ireland. And the Lord of Ireland is, mysteriously enough, the King of England. Now, the Lordship of Ireland theoretically covers all of Ireland. In practice, the amount of control that English kings were able to exercise over Ireland varied enormously over the course of the next 1,000 years, and some might say still does. But what's really significant about this is that this is the moment when England arrives in Ireland and never leaves, ever. It hasn't left. This is an enormous transformation of Irish society. You can't even really begin to articulate the consequences this is going to have. I mean, the main immediate things is that they start, obviously, promoting the Roman sort of tradition of the church with a lot of enthusiasm and violence. And they also start doing the things that Normans do wherever they go, which is build castles and towns. And a lot of the ideological ballast for the, let's call it what is Norman colonization of Ireland, is provided by Gerald of Wales, who, as I mentioned before, yes, he sees himself as a proud Welshman, but there's no pan-Celticism yet. He's just like, well, these are some other people who I don't respect. Because his description of the Irish is that they are a wild and inhospitable people. They live on beasts only and live like beasts.
They're beast moding.
They have not.
It's funny because nowadays you meet a guy named Gerard and it's like he's probably a bit of a Celtic beast.
They have not progressed at all from the primitive habits of pastoral living. While man usually progresses from the woods to the fields and from fields to settlements and communities of citizens, this people despises work on the land, has little use for money-making of towns, condemns the rights and privileges of citizenship, and desires neither to abandon nor lose respect for the life which it has been accustomed to lead in the woods and the countryside.
Based.
Well, okay, but like, does that not sound like what Europeans are going to be saying 500 years later?
About the Irish.
About the Irish, but also about the Native Americans.
Oh, yeah.
About Africans, about huge areas of Asia. Like, this is the blueprint, kind of. It's saying, well, these people don't understand how to do capitalism. Capitalism hasn't been invented yet, don't at me. Like, this is the ideological, this is the first kind of really clear example of the ideological justification for colonialism being used within Britain to justify the colonization of a different country. And this, I think, and this is, I'm going to put a beautiful kind of, a beautiful summary on this. And this, I think, brings us to what is transformational about the Norman Conquest for Britain as the island of Britain as a whole, which is, this is the moment, 1066 to 1171 is the period in which England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales start on the path that they are still on today.
I mean, it's basically when they start existing.
Yeah.
In the modern sense.
Yeah, but also when the kind of characteristics of these countries get embedded. I mean, God, we have a whole episode about how the Normans kind of change English culture and English language, so I won't belabor that point. But suffice to say, Englishness as we understand it does not really exist before 1066. It's this other kind of slightly weirder thing.
I mean, I think the tale of the next 1,000 years is a tale of Englishness and Irishness and Britishness and Celticness and so on in dialogue and in opposition with the Roman and the Romance worlds. Mm-hmm. And it becomes this tale of shame and self-denigration on the part of the Brits and the Irish, who are stigmatized for speaking their language and for their culture, and who eventually are, joyously and willfully and willingly adopting Latin words and French culture and continental culture as prestige, So it is all about constructing the culture and the language and the style of prestige that is basically shaped, I would say, like basically all of modern taste and sensibilities.
Absolutely, I would say
It's
that.
hugely instrumental. And I think the effects of it are still being borne out today, because I think we still live in like a deeply self-conscious sort of ashamed English society, and you still all over see this sort of. I sound like a gammon here. I'm not being. I just hate I hate the French. I don't love the English, but I hate the French.
Well, no, George Orwell says the same thing, basically.
Yes, and so and it's all just the pendulum swinging back and forth of people saying, "Oh, we need more French words. Oh, this is embarrassing for us. Actually, never mind." And it's quite a beautiful thing, because I think it's in the same way like Englishness and Irishness and all of these different identities that spring from this mixture of Norman and insular identities during and after the Norman Conquest become some of the most resilient kind of cosmopolitan identities that we have.
I think that the kind of the final element that sort of consolidated each of these nations' identities is actually the event that the Norman Conquest kind of hundreds of years later set into motion, which is the 100 Years' War. I mean, we've already talked about the ways in which the 100 Years' War is foundational to Englishness, is foundational to or the lead up to the 100 Years' War is certainly foundational to Scottishness. But if you think about it, actually the 100 Years' War and even the Scottish Wars of Independence are an inevitability because of specifically the conditions that the Norman Conquest created, which is the Normans were able to establish themselves as kings in England and also subject to the French king, which is a just about workable kind of fudge when the French kings are very weak. But of course, the French kings do become much stronger in the 13th and the 14th centuries, much more assertive, and that leads essentially the English kings to want to throw around their weight to try and get a bit of their lost prestige back. Meanwhile, you have this network across the islands of Britain of people who nominally are part of the same elite class, the same Norman class, but who are starting to identify with these countries, who are starting to see themselves, even though they are a lot of these sort of these marcher lords or these lords in Ireland that get created after 1171, or these Scottish kind of the Scottish families that David I brought over, even though they exist as the same sort of a shared cultural elite, which Britain and Ireland have never had before, not even in the period of the Romans. Even though they exist in that same cultural space, they still are starting to identify with the states that they're running. And this is inherently unstable, because it means that when a conflict emerges, as it does after the death of Alexander III in Scotland, between your kind of familial and cultural links and identity and the state that you claim to identify with, you're going to have to make a choice. And that is the fault line of the 100 Years' War, that having a cultural kind of zone from Scotland all the way down to France through England was always going to be inherently unstable.
Never in danger, quaileth our fathers, free and undaunted, they sought the renown.
We are almost finished telling you the story of the Norman Conquest, but I think there is one last epilogue that I do really want to give you, because I think it ties everything up quite nicely. So we have a couple of versions of this story. One of them comes from the Icelandic saga of Edward the Confessor, which is an Icelandic text about the life of Edward the Confessor after he became a saint. And another version comes from Odoric Vitalis. And they do kind of disagree about what happens, but there's a common through line. So according to the saga of Edward, After it became clear that William had taken control of England in 1066, the Earl of Gloucester led a flotilla of 350 ships out of England and south, down along the coast of Spain, past the Straits of Gibraltar, and into the Mediterranean. They attacked and looted the Muslim city of Ceuta in North Africa, and they sailed east, past Majorca and to Sicily. And this journey it's a real odyssey. It takes several years for this sort of refugee/pirate fleet to make its way across the Mediterranean until they reach the eastern Mediterranean and they hear that Constantinople is being besieged by an army of unspecified heathens. So they race to Constantinople, and the English army surprises the heathen army and puts them to flight and liberates the city. And to quote the saga, "And after they had had a meeting with the king, and he took wonderfully to them." There's an implied huzzah there.
Of course, there always is.
"And thanked them for the great victory which they had won to give him peace and safety, King Kirlajax." That's what they called that's just a name for the guy who was the Roman emperor at that point. "Kirlajax offered them to abide there and guard his body, as was the wont of the Varangians who went into his pay. But it seemed to Earl Sigurd and the other chiefs that it was too small a career to grow old there in that fashion, that they had not a realm to rule over, and they begged the king to give them some towns or cities, where they might own and their heirs after them. But the king thought he could not strip other men of their estates. And when they came to talk of this, King Kirlajax tells them that he knew of a land lying north in the sea, which had lain under the old emperor of Constantinople, but after the days the heathen army had won it and abode in it. And when the Englishmen heard that, they took a title from the King Kirlajax, that land should be their own, and their heirs after them, if they could won under them from the heathen men, free from tax and toll. The king granted them this." So the English sail north to what we think is the southern coast of Ukraine, and they liberate the lands there, and they set up a little mini kingdom.
Oh.
And according to the sagas, after that they took the land into possession and gave it a name and called it New England. To the towns that were in the land and those which they built, they gave the names of the towns in England. They called them both London and York, and by the names of other great towns in England. The land lies 6 days and nights sail across the sea in the east and northeast from Micklegarth. That's Constantinople. And there is the best of land there, and that folk has abode there ever since. So it seems like happily ever after for these Englishmen who have found themselves in this strange land populated by strange people who speak in funny accents. And so the people of this New England send many of their best warriors to serve as the members of the Varangian Guard. And from the 11th century onwards, the Varangian Guard becomes predominantly English rather than predominantly Viking. If you thought that sailing to Ukraine and living on the coast of the Black Sea meant that you got to get away from all of the nonsense that we've been talking about in this series, you thought wrong. Because, meanwhile, in 1081, a mysterious figure arrives in the court of Robert Guiscard, who is the Norman Duke of Apulia and Calabria, and the ruler now of all of southern Italy. This mysterious figure claimed to be the deposed Byzantine Emperor Mikhail VII, and Robert was like, "Well, okay, I will help you retake the throne. Make sure you don't get vexed," etc. But something seems off about this emperor, and he was quickly revealed to be a monk called Reichtor, who had assumed a false identity. This is something you could do back in the day. Rock up to a foreign court and be like, "Oh, I am just a deposed former emperor. Please, won't you help me retake my kingdom?" But Robert, however, when he learns of this, he's like, I'm just going to do it anyway. Why don't I become emperor of all of Rome? And so the Norman fleet sails from Italy and attacks Greece and Corfu, and it seems like the Normans are going to defeat the Byzantine Empire and conquer all of the Eastern Mediterranean. Until who should come riding to the rescue of the Byzantines and the city of Constantinople but the English. So Odoric Vitalis, I'm going to give him the last word of this series. The English exiles were warmly welcomed by the Greeks and sent into battle against the Norman forces, which were too powerful for the Greeks alone. This is the reason for the exodus of the English Saxons to Ionia. The emigrants and their heirs faithfully served the Holy Empire, and are still honored among the Greeks by the emperor, nobility, and people alike. That is just about going to do us for this episode and this series of the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I hope you've enjoyed going with us on this transcontinental epic journey of battles and betrayals and people getting #vaxxed as a stand-in for getting assassinated. Certainly.
Wait, I thought we were actually talking about vaccines the whole time.
Oh no, we need to have a conversation about your politics. I hope you've enjoyed doing this as much as I and Olivia and Joe and our dear departed Joe Mason have.
Rest in peace, man. I miss him.
Listen, these potions and poultices that I'm working on, they're going to bring him back eventually. Just mark my words. We'll be back later in January with our annual mailbag episode. If you want us to answer a question, please do submit a question on our official Discord, which I will link in the description. Thank you for listening, and we loved making this series, and we are really excited to share with you what we are making next.
Over the course of doing this podcast for more than 2 years now, the proportion of people who have come into our comments and my replies on Twitter and my emails and spelled Aaron's name correctly has skyrocketed.
From 0 to 1.
That would be from no one to everyone. It's not everyone, but you guys are getting there. God bless you all.
And if you loved this episode and this series, then please do give us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice, and please do leave a Spotify comment. And if you do, Olivia might read one out.
Thank you to Federica, who says, as an Italian, thank you for the dig at the French and how lusty they are. Absolutely different from us, a God-fearing country of God-fearing prudes, and where popes absolutely did not have multiple children. That's right, Federica and all of the Italians. Thank you guys for being such a moral example to the rest of Europe. We're really grateful. Thanks to Sir Samuel, who said, what were Harold Godwinson and William the Bastard doing for that mysterious period of time?
We should tell them about this.
Well, in my 20k word fan fiction I'm about to post to AO3, don't play with us like this, because first of all, I would love that. Second of all, when we were at the pub one day,
when we were planning this series, I was talking about how much I shipped them. Aaron was, I think, humoring me. And I went on AO3 in the pub and looked up how many people had written fan fiction that was Harold Godwinson, ex William the Conqueror. The number was 1. Well, it was
one of the most beautiful things I have ever read on my cell phone.
It's a modern AU. It's told like Dracula. It's told in sort of
epistolary style about farming. It's about them fighting over the inheritance of their dearly departed friend Edward's estate. Yeah. Eddie.
It's so good.
Edith is like mediating between them, and it's like Harold is trying to like keep the farm like a small organic business,
And William
is trying to like claim it so he can
Bill
like, sell out.
Norman.
No, his name is Bill Norman.
He's a French businessman.
He's a French businessman named Guillaume Norman.
What I love about it is that it's very clearly deeply researched.
The level of detail.
There's so many jokes in it that you only get if you've listened to this podcast.
No, or if you read the Wikipedia articles for any of the characters involved.
No, nobody's done that.
So yeah, should we link that?
Yes.
I think we'll link that. Because it's really good. And if you wrote that, then contact me for a lucrative custom commission.
Honestly,
NSFW, of course.
I'm gonna be completely frank. I feel like somebody who would write a Norman Conquest AU about gardening is exactly the kind of person who would listen to this show.
God, I hope so.
That is that you referenced earlier, 3 hours earlier in this recording session, that you make this podcast for an imagined listener. Is that not your imagined listener?
If you are the person that wrote that fan fiction, don't ever come to London, England, or I will have no choice but to propose to you. I will get down on my knee.
All right.
Anyways.
In that case, as they say in Norman, England, bon voyage.
Adieu.
C'est fini.